The crystal glasses on the table sparkled so brightly they hurt my eyes. 20 of my husband Julian's friends sat around a long, polished wood table, their laughter sounding loud and empty. This was my 30th birthday party, held at the most expensive restaurant in the city. Julian had arranged everything. He even picked out my dress, a simple dark blue gown that he said made me look less plain. In this room, surrounded by women wearing dresses that cost more than my first car, I felt like a doll he had propped up in a chair. "Amelia, darling, you're so quiet," a woman named Clara said, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Are you not enjoying yourself?" Before I could answer, Julian placed his hand on my shoulder, his grip a little too tight. "She's just not used to this sort of thing," he said to the table, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl, right?" A few people chuckled politely. My cheeks felt warm, but I kept a small, polite smile on my face, just as he'd taught me. I knew he was in a bad mood. A big business deal he'd been bragging about for weeks had failed that afternoon, and when Julian was angry, he needed someone to blame. Tonight, that someone was me. For the past 2 hours, he had been making small, sharp comments. He made fun of how I held my fork. He laughed when I couldn't pronounce the name of the French wine. Each comment was a tiny paper cut, and he was an expert at making me bleed where no one else could see. But tonight felt different. I could see a strange fire in his eyes. He was drinking faster than usual, his movements growing sharp and jerky. I watched him from across the table, my heart not sinking with sadness, but beating with a slow, steady rhythm. I had been waiting for something like this. I just needed him to make one final, public mistake. And here it was, a terrible gift for my birthday. The main course was finished, and the waiters cleared the plates. Julian stood up, tapping his wine glass with a spoon. The empty chatter stopped. Everyone turned to look at him, their faces expecting a sweet, loving toast to his wife. He raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice slurring just a little. "To my wife Amelia, on her 30th birthday." He paused, and for a second, I thought he might just say something kind. I was wrong. His face twisted into a sneer. "I brought her here tonight to show you all what I have to live with," he said, his voice growing louder. "I wanted you to see this. This disgrace I call a wife. She has no style, no class, no understanding of our world. She is an embarrassment." A shocked silence fell over the table. My breath caught in my throat, but I forced myself to meet his hateful gaze. I would not look away. "Every day I have to pretend that she belongs by my side," he spat, his eyes filled with venom. "But she doesn't. She belongs back in the dirt where I found her." He threw his cloth napkin onto the table. It landed next to a huge bill the waiter had just placed there. He looked down at me, his lip curled in disgust. Then he leaned in close, his voice a low, vicious whisper for everyone to hear. "A woman like you is lucky I ever touched you." With that, he turned and walked away. The sound of his shoes clicking on the marble floor was the only noise in the room. He didn't look back. He just left me there, sitting in the middle of 20 shocked faces with a bill for $10,000. The whispers started immediately. People started looking at their phones, avoiding my eyes. I could feel their pity and their judgment washing over me. They expected me to cry, to run out in shame. I did neither. Slowly, I reached into my small handbag. I pulled out a simple, worn wallet that Julian had never seen before. From it, I took out a plain black debit card. He didn't know this card existed. He didn't know this bank account existed. He didn't know a lot of things about me. I caught the waiter's eye and gave him a calm nod. He walked over, his face full of pity. "Ma'am, the bill," he started, unsure what to say. "It's fine," I said, my voice steady. I handed him the card. "I'll take care of it. Please add a generous tip. The service was excellent." He took the card and walked away. A few moments later, he returned with the receipt. I signed my name, my hand not shaking at all. Then, I stood up, smoothing down my simple blue dress. I looked around the table one last time, at all the wealthy, powerful people who had just watched my life fall apart. I didn't say a word to any of them. I simply turned and walked towards the exit, my back straight and my head held high. As the cool night air hit my face, a small smile touched my lips. Julian thought he had destroyed me. He had no idea he had just set me free. Walking out into the city's cool night air, I felt a strange sense of calm. The whole world seemed to go silent. My mind didn't replay the humiliation of Julian's words. Instead, it drifted back 3 years, to a dusty roadside under a hot summer sun. That was where it all began. My car had a flat tire and I was struggling with the rusty bolts when a sleek black sports car pulled over. Julian stepped out, looking like a movie star who had taken a wrong turn. He didn't just help me change my tire, he charmed me. He said my name, Amelia, was beautiful and old-fashioned. He smiled, and I felt like the only person in the world. He saw me as simple, pure, and refreshingly real. I was a small-town girl who worked at the local library, and he was a prince from a faraway city. To him, I was a blank canvas, and he was the artist who would create a masterpiece. I believed it. I fell for the fairy tale he was selling, and when he asked me to marry him just 3 months later, I said yes without a second thought. I left my small town, my friends, and my tiny apartment for a new life in a gilded cage. The first year of our marriage was a blur of changes. He replaced my simple clothes with designer dresses I couldn't pronounce the names of. He swapped my old flip phone for the latest model, telling me it was so he could always reach me. I soon realized it was so he could always track me. My friends from back home stopped calling after Julian made a few cold remarks about their simple lives. He was isolating me, brick by brick, until his world was the only one I knew. Money was his favorite tool of control. I never had a bank account of my own. He gave me a small cash allowance each week, like a child. "You don't need to worry your pretty little head about finances, my love," he would say, patting my head. "That's what I'm for." He wanted me to be completely dependent on him for everything, and for a while, I was. What Julian never knew was that his blank canvas wasn't so blank. Before I moved back home to care for my sick mother, I had earned a university degree. It wasn't in art or literature, subjects he might have found charmingly useless. It was in forensic accounting. I was good with numbers. I was excellent at finding things that people tried to hide. I learned early in our marriage that Julian hated ambition in women. He found it unattractive. So I hid that part of myself away. I played the part of the simple, adoring wife because it was what he wanted. I became the doll in his dollhouse. The turning point came about a year ago. Julian had become arrogant and careless, believing I was too naive to understand his world. He would leave company reports and financial statements on his desk in our home office. One evening, as I was tidying up, my eyes scanned a page. I saw the name of a company I didn't recognize, with a payment of over $1 million for consulting fees. It seemed odd. Out of old habit, my brain started working. I knew his father's company didn't use outside consultants for that kind of work. That night, after he fell into a deep, wine-induced sleep, I crept into his office. I took a picture of the document with my phone. The next day, while he was at work, I started digging. It was a slow and careful process. I used the library computer's untraceable public Wi-Fi. I opened a secret bank account with the small amount of emergency money I had saved from my life before him. I found one lie, which led to another, and another. It was a complex web of fake companies, secret bank accounts, and stolen money. Julian wasn't just a cruel husband. He was a thief, siphoning millions from his own father's company. From that moment on, my life had a secret purpose. I wasn't just a prisoner in a gilded cage anymore. I was a quiet observer, gathering evidence. Every insult he threw at me, every time he made me feel small, I added it to the growing fire inside me. I was just waiting for the right moment to burn his world to the ground. His public explosion at my birthday dinner wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his. The morning sun streamed through the window of a hotel room I had booked under a name Julian had never heard. It felt different from the morning light in our mansion, which always seemed cold and gray, no matter the weather. Here, it felt warm and hopeful. I woke up feeling not tired or sad, but calm and focused, like a soldier on the morning of a great battle. My phone lay face down on the bedside table. It had been vibrating nonstop since dawn. I finally picked it up and turned it over. The screen glowed with a notification. 1 no. 1 missed calls. Julian. Beneath it was a long, desperate river of text messages. The first ones, from the early hours of the morning, were full of rage. Where are you? You can't hide from me. You will regret embarrassing me like that. Then, as the hours passed and he realized I wasn't coming back, the tone began to change. The anger soured into confusion, then curdled into fear. Amelia, this isn't funny anymore. Just come home. Please, pick up the phone. We can talk about this. I'm sorry, okay? I was drunk. I didn't mean it. Please, I'm sorry. I read the last message, feeling nothing at all. I switched the phone to silent and placed it back on the table. His apologies were as worthless as his promises. Are you ready? A calm voice asked from across the room. I looked up and smiled. Sitting in an armchair with a cup of coffee was Mr. Harrison, a kind-faced, gray-haired man who had been my secret for the past 6 months. He was an old friend of Julian's father and one of the most respected corporate lawyers in the city. He had seen the real me from the very beginning. The audio from the hidden recorder in your brooch is crystal clear, he said, giving me a reassuring nod. Every single word he said is captured. It's more than enough. I knew he would break eventually, I said, my voice steady. He needed an audience to feel powerful, and I knew his anger over that failed deal would make him careless. His public cruelty was the last piece I needed. Mr. Harrison gestured to a thick black binder sitting on the small table between us. It was heavy with printed documents, bank statements, and spreadsheets. It was the product of 1,000 hidden moments, late nights on a secret laptop, quiet trips to the public library, and careful, patient investigation. It was my life's work for the past year. Inside that binder was undeniable proof of everything. Proof that Julian had been systematically stealing money from his father's company for years. He created fake companies and paid them for services that were never performed. He used that stolen money to fund his flashy lifestyle, the cars, the watches, the parties for his fake friends. He thought he was clever, covering his tracks with complicated transactions. But he never imagined that the simple little wife he ignored at home was an expert at following exactly these kinds of trails. Everything is in motion, Mr. Harrison said, looking at his watch. The divorce papers citing extreme emotional cruelty were filed with the court 10 minutes ago. A courier is on his way to the Vance Corporation headquarters with a copy of this binder for every member of the board. And a third courier, he paused looking at me, is delivering a special hand-addressed copy directly to your father-in-law, Alistair Vance. A shiver, not of fear but of excitement, ran down my spine. Alistair. He was the one person Julian truly feared. He was a man who had built an empire from nothing and despised weakness and dishonesty above all else. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city waking up below. Julian was waking up too, but his world was about to be plunged into darkness. He thought last night was his victory, his moment of putting me in my place. He had no idea it was his public execution, and I was the one who had handed him the sword. This wasn't just about leaving him. It was about taking back my life and showing everyone, especially him, who I really was. After Mr. Harrison left to oversee the next steps of our plan, I remained in the quiet hotel room. The city hummed below, alive and indifferent. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat in the armchair by the window, not watching the traffic, but watching the clock on the wall. Every tick of the second hand was a beat in a symphony I had composed long ago. I knew Julian's morning routine better than he did. I knew every one of his weaknesses, every one of his vanities. And now I could picture his world beginning to crumble, piece by predictable piece. It would start with his pride. I knew he would have woken up alone in our cold, oversized bed, a smug smirk on his face. He would be thinking of me, picturing me crying in some cheap motel, already regretting my defiance. He would feel powerful, in control. His first act of the day would be to reward himself for his supposed victory. He'd try to order a ridiculously expensive breakfast, something decadent to celebrate putting me in my place. I could see it so clearly. Him, barking an order into the phone for truffle-covered eggs, rattling off his unlimited corporate card number like a king announcing a decree. And then, the pause. The polite, hesitant voice on the other end saying, "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined." I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. The rage would hit him first, a hot, blinding flash. He'd think it was a mistake, an insult. He would slam the phone down and immediately call his private banker, ready to have someone fired. But the banker, a man who bowed and scraped to Julian's every whim, would have received his orders from a much higher power. Alistair. I could imagine the banker's voice, suddenly stripped of all warmth, becoming a cold, professional instrument of bad news. "Your accounts have been frozen, Julian, pending an internal investigation." That would be the moment the first real crack would appear in his perfect world. The rage would curdle into confusion, then into a cold, creeping dread. The money wasn't just money to Julian. It was everything. It was his power, his identity, his shield against the world. Without it, he was nothing. Panicked, he would turn to his other source of power, his friends. He'd start making calls, desperate to find an ally, to find someone who would confirm his reality. He'd call Clara first, then Thomas, expecting them to laugh with him about his crazy wife and this ridiculous bank error. But their phones would go straight to voicemail. One by one, the people he thought were his loyal court would abandon him. News of a falling star travels faster than light in that social circle. They were parasites, and they could smell a dying host. The silence from his friends would wound his ego more deeply than the frozen accounts. It would be a profound personal rejection that he wouldn't know how to process. He would be pacing the length of the mansion's marble foyer, a caged animal, the walls he thought were his fortress suddenly feeling like a prison. And then, right on schedule, the doorbell would ring. The courier Mr. Harrison had dispatched would be standing there, holding a crisp, official envelope. I could picture the scene perfectly. Julian, snatching the envelope, his hands shaking slightly as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the legal language, the words, "dissolution of marriage," and "petitioner, Amelia Vance," jumping out at him. That would be the final blow. The moment all the pieces would click into place. This wasn't a bank error. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated attack. And the person leading the charge wasn't some corporate rival or a faceless enemy. It was me, his quiet, simple, invisible wife. In that moment, standing alone in his silent, empty mansion, Julian would finally understand that he was not the hunter. He was the prey. The elevator ride to the top floor felt strangely peaceful. The quiet hum of the machinery was the only sound as Mr. Harrison and I ascended into the heart of the Vance empire. When the doors slid open, we stepped into the boardroom. It was exactly as I had imagined. A vast, intimidating space with glass walls that made you feel like you were floating above the city. At the far end of a long mahogany table sat Alistair Vance. He didn't look up when we entered, but I knew he was aware of our every move. He radiated an aura of immense power, quiet and absolute. Mr. Harrison and I took our seats, and I placed my simple briefcase on the polished table, the soft click echoing in the silence. This was it. The culmination of a year of secrets, a year of biting my tongue and playing a role. My heart was beating a steady, strong rhythm. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. A moment later, the door burst open and Julian stormed in. He looked rumpled and panicked, his hair a mess and his eyes wild. When he saw me sitting there next to Mr. Harrison, his face contorted with a mixture of shock and fury. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Julian," Alistair said, his voice dangerously calm. He didn't raise it, but the single word silenced my husband instantly. "Sit down." Julian slumped into a chair across from me, his eyes darting between me and his father. He was a cornered animal, and he was about to do exactly what I expected him to do. Lie. "Father, this is absurd," he began, trying to force a laugh that sounded more like a choke. It's a lie. She's a scorned woman trying to get a bigger divorce settlement. She's vindictive. She's making it all up. Look at her. Who are you going to believe, me or the simple girl you've seen at family dinners? Alistair's gaze remained fixed on his son for a long moment. Then, he turned his head slowly and looked at me. His eyes were like chips of ice, searching for any sign of weakness or deceit. I met his gaze without flinching. "Ms. Vance," he said, the formal title a clear signal. "Please proceed." I took a deep breath and opened my briefcase. I didn't look at Julian. My focus was entirely on his father. "Mr. Vance, for the past 18 months, Julian has been embezzling funds through a series of shell corporations he established offshore." I slid the first document across the gleaming table. It was a bank statement. I had practiced this moment 100 times in my head. "This is the first one I found," I explained, my voice even and professional. "A payment to a company called Apex Global Consulting. According to company records, this was for market analysis on a European expansion project." "A legitimate business expense," Julian spat, his face turning red. I ignored him. Apex Global Consulting was registered in the Cayman Islands 2 days before this payment was made. I continued, looking only at Alistair. "Its sole director is a man who doesn't exist. The corporate address is a P.O. box, and the money, after being wired there, was immediately transferred to a private account in Switzerland." I slid another paper across the table. "An account held in your son's name." Alistair picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the details. I watched him, seeing the subtle tightening of the muscles in his jaw. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out my case. I presented a chain of evidence so clear and so strong that it was impossible to deny. Each fake invoice, each illegal transfer, each lie was exposed. I had followed the money, and it had painted a perfect picture of Julian's betrayal. I spoke calmly, presenting the facts without emotion, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. This wasn't personal, it was business. Julian tried to interrupt, his denials growing weaker and more desperate each time. He was drowning, and I was the one calmly describing the water filling his lungs. Through it all, I watched Alistair. I saw the moment his expression shifted. He was no longer a father listening to accusations against his son. He was a CEO looking at a cancer that was threatening to destroy his life's work. When I was finished, I closed my briefcase. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. Alistair placed the papers into a neat pile. He didn't look at them. He looked at Julian. He looked at him as if he had never truly seen him before. "Julian," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, "you are a fool." After my father-in-law called Julian a fool, the silence in the room was absolute. It felt like the air had solidified, trapping us all in that one final moment of judgment. Julian just stared at him, his mouth slightly open, his mind clearly struggling to catch up with reality. The arrogance that had been his armor for so long had shattered, leaving him exposed and pathetic. Alistair didn't waste another second. He pressed a button on the intercom on his desk. "Helen," he said, his voice as cold as steel, "get me the head of security and the head of public relations. In my office, now." Julian started to shake his head, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. "Father, no. Please. We can fix this. I can pay it back. I'll do anything." Alistair didn't even look at him. He turned to me. "Ms. Vance," he said, the name a formal barrier between us, "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention with discretion. You have saved this company from a far greater crisis." It wasn't an apology for his son's behavior, but it was an acknowledgement. It was respect. The door opened and 2 stern-looking people, a man and a woman, walked in. They were the heads of security and PR. Alistair's orders were swift and brutal. "Julian Vance is no longer an employee of this company, effective immediately," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "His access is to be revoked. Escort him from the premises. He is not to take anything with him." To the head of PR, he said, "We will be issuing a press release in 1 hour. It will state that an internal audit has uncovered significant financial misconduct and that Mr. Julian Vance's employment has been terminated. We are cooperating fully with the authorities." Julian finally broke. He lunged forward, his hands on the table. "You can't do this to me. I'm your son. This is my name on the building." "Your name is a privilege you have lost," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, which was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You are no longer a part of this family or this company. You are on your own." The head of security, a large, impassive man, stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Julian's shoulder. All the fight went out of him at once. He collapsed back into his chair, a broken man. I watched as they led him out of the boardroom. He didn't look at me. He couldn't look at anyone. As he passed through the door, I heard the security chief speak into his radio. "Deactivate Julian Vance's keycard, all access levels." I stayed for a while longer, answering Alistair's follow-up questions with Mr. Harrison by my side. I was calm, professional. When I finally left that building an hour later, the news was already breaking online. Vance Air fired in major corporate scandal. I didn't see Julian again, but I heard about his downfall in pieces over the next few weeks. Mr. Harrison kept me updated. The company-owned penthouse was cleared out. The luxury car was repossessed. His so-called friends, the ones who had laughed at his cruel jokes at my birthday dinner, were now the first to leak embarrassing stories about him to the tabloids. Without his father's money, his entire world vanished. He had no skills, no real friends, and no one to bail him out. I heard through a legal channel that his bank accounts contained less than $1,000. He was forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place he used to mock. I never felt a surge of joy or a desire for revenge. Watching him fall wasn't a victory celebration. It was a quiet, necessary conclusion. He had built his entire identity on a foundation of money and power that was never truly his. When that was taken away, there was nothing left of him. Justice, I realized, wasn't a loud explosion. It was a quiet, heavy door clicking shut, locking a monster in a prison of his own making. And I was finally on the other side, free. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime ago that I had stood outside that restaurant, the cool night air feeling like the first breath of a new life. The chair I was sitting in now was made of soft black leather and was positioned at the head of the long mahogany table in the Vance Corporation boardroom. It was the same chair Alistair had sat in, the one that had once felt like a throne of intimidation. Today, it just felt like my chair. The room was filled with the senior executives of the company, men who just a year ago would have looked straight through me at corporate events, dismissing me as Julian's quiet, simple wife. Now they listened intently as I spoke, their pens scratching notes on paper. Their respect wasn't given to me because of my last name, it was earned. Alistair hadn't offered me a handout. He'd offered me a job. A few weeks after Julian's dismissal, he had called me into his office. He wasn't a man for apologies, but in his own way, he acknowledged what I had done. He hadn't seen a vengeful ex-wife. He'd seen a brilliant mind that could find a needle in a haystack of numbers. He asked me to lead the new internal audit team, to help him clean up the mess his son had made and to put systems in place so it could never happen again. I accepted. I had spent the last 6 months rebuilding. Not just my life, but entire departments of this company. I worked tirelessly, driven by a passion I had suppressed for years. I discovered that I wasn't just good at finding problems, I was good at solving them. The people in this room had been skeptical at first, but I had proven my worth with results, not words. I was no longer the woman who was lucky to be touched. I was the woman who was rebuilding an empire. That concludes the quarterly review, I said, closing the binder in front of me. Thank you for your time. The men nodded, gathering their things and filing out of the room with polite murmurs of, "Good work, Amelia." When the heavy door clicked shut, I was alone. The silence felt different now. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the vast city skyline, the endless rows of buildings glittering under the afternoon sun. It was a view of infinite possibility. My phone buzzed softly on the table. A text message from a blocked number. I knew who it was before I even read it. It was the third one this month. Hey, it's me. I know you hate me. I get it. But I'm in trouble. Could you spare a little, just to get by? Please. I read the words, and the most surprising thing happened. I felt nothing. Not a flicker of pity, not a spark of triumph. It was like reading an old weather report for a storm that had long since passed. He was just a ghost, a pathetic echo from a life that no longer belonged to me. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second, then I pressed delete. I didn't even bother blocking the number again. It didn't matter. He couldn't reach me anymore. I stood up and walked to the vast glass window, placing my hand against the cool surface. Down below, the city was a tapestry of 1,000,000 different stories, 1,000,000 different lives. And for the first time, mine was entirely my own, written in my own words, on my own terms. A genuine, quiet smile spread across my face, not of victory over him, but of joy for myself. The night Julian left me in that restaurant was my 30th birthday. But looking out at the endless horizon, I realized he had been wrong about everything, including that. My real birthday had just begun,